إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا، من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد, Dawkins then proceeds to say, stage magic, by contrast to supernatural magic, really does happen, and it can be great fun, or at least something really happens, though it isn't what the audience thinks it is. A man on stage, it usually is a man for some reason, deceives us into thinking that something astonishing has happened. It may even seem supernatural, when what really happened was something quite different. Silk handkerchiefs cannot turn into rabbits, any more than frogs can turn into princes. What we have seen on the stage is only a trick. Now again we have to ask Dawkins, those last statements you declared are statements of rational necessity, or merely the declaration of the extent to which our inductive knowledge of physics and the laws of nature has reached? Nature is not an arbiter of binding laws in any rational capacity. Nature is simply the way matter has been observed to behave in our accumulated experience here on Earth. So while we may have never observed matter to do X or behave in such a way that X would obtain, this does not in any sensible manner warrant a position that X is impossible or can never happen in reality. I can cite quite a few examples of things that were once thought to be impossible, which are now happening regularly in personal gadgets that we all carry in our pockets, precisely because our human experience with the way matter can indeed behave has evolved significantly and exponentially throughout the years. Arthur C. Clarke is famously quoted to have said, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." So if by magic we mean, like Clarke here, things that are not in accord with our current knowledge of nature and the way matter can behave, our current knowledge of science and tech, that is, then you, Dawkins, have no grounds to dismiss the idea of a handkerchief actually turning into a bird or a rabbit in any rational capacity. If only a few decades ago, the mere idea of a piece of glass displaying the images of moving people in our hands was supernatural in this very same manner, then it would be a textbook example of an argument from personal incredulity to claim that supernatural magic is impossible or cannot be real. The best that you would be justified to say at any given moment is this: as far as we know, at this point in time in history, there is no way for us to go X or to do X or Y through natural or scientifically established means. You would be telling the truth, of course, if indeed this is the case with the status of natural science at that point in human history in which you made such a statement. But what rational warrant could there be under a claim to the effect that X or Y can never happen in reality at all? None whatsoever. It's one thing to make such a rhetorical declaration for the benefit of addressing some ignorant folk with profoundly false beliefs, or some children who think that a stage magician has in fact created a bird out of a piece of cloth. And it's another thing altogether to write such a statement in the context of providing a metaphysical theory about all of reality. It's one thing to only be making a declaration of the epistemic limits of your current knowledge of reality, and another thing to be holding a model ontological judgment about what can or cannot exist in reality altogether. That's where scientific realism comes crashing down in spades, guys. It's a belief system about the unseen and the unexperienced that is every bit as dogmatic as any religion. Where else would Dawkins find such confidence and certainty in his claim that if ever we observed such transformations, then what we've seen can only be a trick or something like that, something that is naturally explained or can be explained by natural causes? This is not and cannot be warranted by any science we now have or can come to have at any given point in human history. Why? Because science, by its nature, is not revelational knowledge. Okay, it's entirely based on suggestions of analogy and limited inductions from experience. It does not reveal the unseen. Okay, It only conjectures what it might be like based on nothing more than matching some analogy we suggest with what we currently observe in our accumulated experience with this small part of the world that we occupy. In order to be rationally justified in making an ontological judgment about what cannot happen anywhere, anytime, there can only be one of two plausible routes for that: a deduction from purely rational necessity, or a piece of revealed knowledge from Scripture that is indeed the true word of the Creator of all things himself. Apart from those two sources alone, no other source can provide any epistemic warrant for such a judgment. In other words, we cannot know that judgment, a statement of absolute impossibility, to be true from science. So for someone who admits no Scripture any epistemic authority whatsoever, Dawkins is left with absolutely no grounds for such a claim. In reality, he's only preaching his own religious faith, blind faith, with pretty much the same kind of rhetoric you would find in a Sunday school. Now, in case you might miss the point, I'm not suggesting that any of these stage performers actually does transform a piece of cloth into a living creature. I'm only arguing that there is no grounds for judging it to be absolutely impossible from whatever sources of knowledge someone like Dawkins here may be referring to. Now, he might counter here by saying, I'm not claiming it to be rationally impossible in the sense that you explained. Clearly one doesn't suffer any contradiction in claiming that it can indeed happen. I'm only holding that it's extremely unlikely to happen on any magician's stage or anywhere else for that matter. And extreme improbability is almost a judgment of impossibility in practical terms. We've never seen the sun rise from the west, or a man falling upwards instead of falling to the ground when he jumps from a window or the likes. So to call that impossible in colloquial terms wouldn't be irrational. Okay, and now to that we would start our response by demanding a clear definition of what the term unlikely and improbable really mean, and thereby proceed to explain how we manage to make such judgments in any sensible manner. Okay, the term unlikely is, by the very definition of probability, a judgment of human experience. Okay, two schools prevail in defining probability in Western philosophy, as it's known to anybody who's familiar with the text, with the literature: the frequentist approach and the Bayesian approach. Both schools would argue that without any inference from experience whatsoever, probability is meaningless. Okay, both approaches have their issues and inconsistencies, which is not a subject we can discuss at length in this space. Suffice it to say that whatever you think of these two approaches, we must have previous knowledge, either from frequent repetitions or from previously collected data, relevant data, before we make any probability estimate for event X to take place under given circumstances in the future. By unlikely, then, we would mean that experience we have with similar cases to X only justifies us in believing that it might happen under similar circumstances with P certainty, or in P% of the time, okay, where P is considerably smaller than 0.5 or 50, respectively. And by extremely unlikely, we would mean then an estimate for P that is close to 0. Okay, it would only mean that given our previous experience, there is extremely little chance that X or something like it would happen under particular circumstances. It is fairly clear thus that if by supernatural we mean something that does not fall within the scope of our previous experience with the natures of things and with the way things work, then an estimate of probability is by definition meaningless when it comes to events of such sort. Unless we have additional knowledge from Scripture, we cannot even begin to rely upon experience to give us any meaningful judgment of probability for a certain supernatural event to happen. We have seen many people do things that look quite a lot like turning a handkerchief into a rabbit. Yes, that's been observed quite commonly. The only reason that probabilistic logic can give us for someone like Dawkins to think that it's more likely a trick than an actual transformation is that we have frequently seen more stage performers admitting it to be a trick, okay, than otherwise. Far more indeed. So in light of that experience alone, he would be justified in expecting any such case he comes across to be yet another stage trick. But that obviously does not justify the claim that it can never happen in reality, that it cannot ever be anything but a trick. Okay, this is obviously a much stronger claim than anything a probabilistic estimate from individual or accumulated experience as such can warrant. Okay, and that's, brothers and sisters, because it is only founded on a religious belief that only the natural can be real. A belief that only the natural can be real. Okay, it's not false because it's religious. Okay, I wouldn't be making such a claim, obviously. It's only false because it's unfounded, because it's senseless. Okay, as we will proceed to show, and as we've actually discussed in previous lectures. A belief that is entirely founded on metaphysical naturalism. Okay, now ask him what grounds or evidence he can present for believing that doctrine itself to be true, and you will see him fall flat on his face. He goes on to say, our eyes have deceived us, or rather, the conjurer has gone to great pains to deceive our eyes, perhaps by cleverly using words to distract us from what he is really doing with his hands. Some conjurers are honest and go out of the way to make sure their audiences know that they have simply performed a trick. I'm thinking of people like James the Amazing Randi and Penn and Teller or Darren Brown. Even though these admirable performers don't usually tell the audience exactly how they did the trick, they could be thrown out of the magic circle, the conjurer's club. If they did that, they do make sure the audience knows that there was no supernatural magic involved. Others don't actively spell out that it was just a trick, but they don't make exaggerated claims about what they have done either. They just leave the audience with the rather enjoyable sensation that something mysterious has happened, without actively lying about it. But unfortunately, there are some conjurers who are deliberately dishonest and who pretend they really do have supernatural or paranormal powers. Perhaps they claim that they really can bend metal or stop clocks by the power of their thoughts alone, by the power of thought alone. Okay, now I would not dispute the judgment that some of those who claim their work to be due to supernatural powers are indeed dishonest and are lying to fool people out of their money. That's evidently the case. There is some considerable real-world experience to tell us that such people do in fact exist. However, such experience can only warrant a probability estimate of how many claimers of such power are indeed lying about it. And I'm not talking about the power to do things with one's minds. Okay, that's a detail that they pretend. This is it may in fact be it may in fact not be a trick. It may not employ something physical in the sense that we know, but if indeed it's supernatural, it doesn't have to be the power of their thought as they pretend it to be. Other metaphysical or other paranormal or unseen agents might be involved, as we shall proceed to explain. But the point here is that, yes, of course, some of them are lying. Many of them. Most of them even, I'm willing to admit. That's evidently the case. There is some considerable real-world experience to tell us that such people do in fact exist, and there are plenty of them around. Okay? However, such experience, as I now mentioned, can only warrant a probability estimate of how many claimers of such power are indeed lying about it. It does not, though, warrant an absolute judgment then that any and all those who claim to be doing real magic are in fact dishonest. Okay? They may not be quite honest, they may not be telling the truth about how they do it, okay, that they're using their minds to control things or stuff like that. Okay, that's not the case. Okay, actually, in reality, if indeed it is real magic, but to deduce from this experience that I just mentioned that real magic doesn't exist is simply a fallacy. Okay, it does not, though, warrant an absolute judgment that any and all those who claim to be doing real magic are in fact dishonest or lying. If X is a deed by one such magician that can either be explained by whoever observes it as a brilliant trick, okay, where you cannot actually see how the trick was performed, or a breach of what we humans know how to do, it can either be explained as this or as that, then knowing that many of the cases where such magicians claim to have actually challenged the laws of physics one way or another, or employed some supernatural causes, were in fact nothing but deception and dishonesty does not suffice to justify belief that every single time X has ever been observed on the hands of a person, then it was necessarily a trick, and that it would be a blatant lie for them to claim otherwise. Okay, that does not follow. That does not follow from this. That would be a statement of metaphysical modality, not a probabilistic judgment from experience. Okay, it's obviously not the same thing, brothers and sisters. Now, do I, as a Muslim, have a reason to believe that some people can, in fact, do real magic? Yes, I do. Am I being irrational just for saying that I have scriptural reasons to think so? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This would be the case only if the very idea of there being real magic in the world at all was irrational, in the sense that it implied contradiction or logical fallacy in any sense. This is not the case. Okay? Only under metaphysical naturalism would you be obliged, would you be committed to stick to methodological naturalism in hypothesizing explanations for any and all things that may look like real magic. The famous dictum, there must be a scientific explanation for this or that, is not a rational necessity, brothers and sisters, as many people are tempted to think. It's merely a meme from a cultural tradition that has long been trenched into the doctrine of metaphysical naturalism in the West. The idea is that people are taught by the academy to build scientific theories designed precisely for them to be able to say this. Okay? All of reality, everything that exists in reality must be subject matter of science, must be the subject matter of science, must be included in the theory, so that people can be justified in believing that whatever happens anywhere, anytime, a good scientist, formerly philosopher of course, should be able to explain away. Okay? But are we humans justified in believing that anything that happens in reality, anything at all, must be such that our best theories of science can indeed provide an explanation for them? Obviously, this is not in itself a question of science. It's a question about the limits of science. It's a meta-scientific question, so to speak. And the answer is, of course not. We're not justified in believing this. However, as the case may be, events that can be explained by causes that fall within our accumulated human experience are far more common than events that would challenge that experience. Okay, that also has to be admitted. By falling within our accumulated experience, I mean events where we humans have had a shared history of experiencing both the event, its cause, and the connection between them, the event and the cause, in direct observation. It is not often the case that a magician is actually employing the aid of an invisible supernatural being like the jinn, for example, in performing a staged trick, okay, as we humans believe is possible. We know from Scripture that such beings do exist, okay, and we know from Scripture too that it is possible, authentic Scripture, that it is possible that they could be asked to do things in this world in certain ways. And we've seen it happen repeatedly. We've seen cases where things have happened that can only be explained by the work of jinn, in fact. Such observations are not only scientific, are not only specific to people in Muslim nations and in the Arabian culture. These observations are not only specific to us as Muslims or Arabs. Every culture in the world has its own legacy of paranormal events, even in the West. So much so that a naturalist has a heavy a magnanimous religious obligation to propose a scientific explanation for each and every such story, wherever, whenever, and whoever tells it. The implicit assumption here is that all religions of the world are false by necessity, and only the religion of metaphysical naturalism, or the doctrine of metaphysical naturalism, is fit to provide plausible explanation for everything, everywhere. All people are fools who do not embrace metaphysical naturalism. That's in a nutshell what this is about. In fact, Dawkins finds no trouble at all in proposing mass hallucination as blanket explanation for each and every apparition or citation of a religious significance to any group of people, no matter how many they were, no matter how sober or mentally fit, no matter where or when or under what circumstances the apparition is claimed to have occurred, if indeed it cannot be said to have been staged or faked one way or another. This, brothers and sisters, is a metaphysical claim that is almost as strong in the epistemic warrant it calls for as the belief that no such thing exists as the supernatural or the paranormal. Okay? You can only be justified in making it if indeed it's rationally impossible for anybody to claim to have seen something paranormal in nature and be telling the truth about it. There are two levels of justification here, brothers and sisters. A, the claim that anything supernatural at all has ever been observed in a given instance or has been observed in a given instance. And B, the claim that that thing that was observed is indeed what those people of the faith claim it to be. I make this careful distinction because most supernatural apparitions of religious capacity are claims of false deities appearing to support their worshippers or to give them hope or something in that vein. So just because B is false, okay, the belief that this is indeed Shiva or Jesus or Mary or something like that, doesn't imply that A is false, that this is in fact a supernatural event. We have scriptural reasons to believe that the jinn do in fact play tricks to fool people of many false religions into believing that they have seen miraculous apparitions and deeds by their deities. So while Dawkins and like-minded people would resort in explaining any such event, if it cannot be shown to be staged, that is, to an unwarranted metaphysical claim of ontological impossibility based on their fundamentally unjustifiable doctrine of metaphysical naturalism, we Muslims, on the other hand, would allow for all rationally possible explanations. Hallucination, of course, yes, it can be. Paranormal agency, yes, the jinn, or anything else we may not yet know. It's also possible, but we may have different probabilistic estimates for these each of these three types of explanations in any given stance. But the point is, we allow for all these three possibilities. We allow for them. Okay, and that's usually all we need to know in most such cases, without actually needing to conclude which of these possible explanations is indeed the culprit in a particular case. Okay, unlike a naturalist who has a pressing religious need, commitment, okay, to demonstrate that every such case is indeed anything but a paranormal event, since it only takes one paranormal event established by irrefutable evidence, if such kind of evidence can exist in fact, to defeat his entire metaphysical belief system. Which only just one case is enough to defeat it. Okay? Thus it followed that not a single case of actual paranormal agency has ever been recorded without really getting reduced to natural causes. Okay? It's a matter of religious belief. Alright? This is why James Randi, for example, put forward his famous $1 million paranormal challenge, because every time anyone buzzes the media with claims that something paranormal has indeed been observed, it's a potential threat for their entire worldview. So he thought, let's show that even under the incentive of a potential prize, a challenge for a potential prize, they wouldn't be able to convince us. They wouldn't be able to actually demonstrate that in the conditions, in the way that we insist that they do. And sure enough, of the thousands of applicants or so who were tested throughout the years for that prize, from 1964 to 2015, none managed to win. Randi was quoted saying, "I always have an out. I am right." Okay, that is, no matter what anybody would show him, it would readily be explained away as anything but paranormal or supernatural. The whole thing was about showing that all paranormal claims were by definition and by necessity, dare I say, by necessity, lies or self-deceit. Okay? He was never going to pay a penny in that prize. That's his out, brothers and sisters. Okay? He has the belief that this can never be shown, that this can never be established. So he is driven strongly by the powerful incentive to explain everything in this manner or in that manner, that in naturalistic terms. Okay? Dawkins goes on to say, some of these dishonest fakes, charlatans is a good word for them, earn large fees from mining or oil companies by claiming that they can tell, using psychic powers, where would be a good place to drill. Okay, now here Dawkins puts on the cloak of an advisor, of someone who is wise enough to advise these companies and those people who pay those large sums of money to steer away from doing this, because they would be fools if they did respond to any such claim at all. Okay, now he's trying to provide people with a normative judgment here. And I say, indeed, some of them do. Some of these people are, in fact, liars. Okay. However, that still does not justify the belief that anybody can ever have a paranormal cause that would enable them to actually do that, to actually learn about what a good place to dig for something is. Okay, so for someone who believes in such a cause to be a possibility, like using the aid of jinn, for example, how can one actually tell if those who claim to be employing it are indeed telling the truth? Well, they have to have sufficient knowledge of what signs can determine that a paranormal agent is indeed involved. In the Islamic tradition, such knowledge is abundant, in fact. However, it is not permissible in Islam, in Islamic law, for people to actually conjure jinn or employ them for anything at all, even if the jinni claimed to be a Muslim. Okay, even if the jinni claimed to be a Muslim, and that's the right position to take here according to Islamic scripture. In fact, supernatural magic, real magic of any sort is a major sin in Islam. Supernatural magic or real magic is a major sin. Okay, من السبع الموبقات, punishable by death. The ways by which we can determine if the work of jinn is involved in such cases or not is a brilliant blend of both scriptural and empirical evidence. Take the idea of demonic possession, for example. Okay, while naturalists have a metaphysical commitment or predisposition by virtue of their own religious restriction on causality and causation to explain away every single case of alleged possession as nothing more than a severe case of epilepsy, no matter what symptoms or signs might show up on the person in question, we Muslims can in fact distinguish between a genuine case of possession and a case of epileptic seizure by identifying clear signs of a separate consciousness speaking on the tongue of the inflicted person or affecting their body or the things around them in certain ways. Those signs are known to us from two different sources simultaneously, from authentic scripture on one hand and from the experience of some religious authorities throughout the centuries, scholars who have in fact seen those signs and acted accordingly. One such sign, for example, is when the victim or the possessed speaks coherently in a language we know for a fact that they have never spoken or learned in their life. They've never spoken Spanish, or they've never spoken Greek, or they've never spoken Arabic, or something like that. Okay? There's definitely no documented cases of epilepsy where a person would do that. Is there? There isn't. Okay, where would they get that knowledge from anyway? Okay, where would someone like this person that we have known his entire life happen to learn such a language? Okay, without actually we be able to know or identify this? Okay, it's extremely unlikely that that would be the case in many cases. Okay, or when the possessed is observed to levitate, for example, to levitate, you see their bodies levitating. Okay, without anything carrying them in front of your own eyes, and you know for a fact there cannot have been any trick staged here. You're standing in someone's own bedroom or something like that, and they're levitating. Okay, as has famously been pictured in many movies. Okay, there is nothing irrational about that happening, and indeed it does happen, and people have observed it repeatedly. Okay. So that would be, or if you observe them bending their limbs or their back in a manner no normal human can do in seizure or otherwise in epilepsy. Okay, levitation is a clear sign of the paranormal, and though it has been witnessed countless times in different cultures, a naturalist would be willing to go as far as doubting their very own eyes to deny its very possibility, in keeping with the metaphysical commitment he had chosen to embrace with respect to the unseen and the supernatural, that it's simply impossible. It simply doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. Look, for example, at what is written in the Wikipedia entry on levitation, and I quote, "Levitation or transvection in the paranormal or religious context is the claimed ability to raise a human body or other objects into the air by mystical means. While believed in some religious and New Age communities to occur due to supernatural, psychic, or energetic phenomena, okay, there is no scientific evidence of levitation occurring. Alleged cases of levitation can usually be explained by natural causes such as trickery, illusion, and hallucination." And I unquote. Reading this, one has to wonder why it was deemed proper by this author to describe it as the claimed ability, just because it comes from religious contexts or backgrounds, when in fact its blanket dismissal in Western academia, as the text implies, is also the artifact of nothing short of a religious context all the same, and opposing religion, or religious belief, or quasi-religious belief if you wish, the religion of naturalism. Okay, if indeed you're religiously neutral, as the rules of writing in Wikipedia would have us believe, you would probably phrase such a bullet description in a way that reads something more like this. Levitation or transfixion in the paranormal or religious context is the ability to raise a human body or other object into the air by mystical means, while believed in some religious and New Age communities to occur due to supernatural, psychic, or energetic causes. Under metaphysical naturalism, on the other hand, levitation cannot be shown to actually occur. If indeed it ever appears as though an actual case of levitation was observed, it would be systematically explained by natural causes as trickery, illusion, and hallucination under methodological naturalism. This would be the proper way to write such an introduction, brothers and sisters, if you, the author in Wikipedia, weren't yourself a metaphysical naturalist. Okay? Of course, it is claimed by people from metaphysical doctrines other than the one that you embrace that such an event can indeed occur in reality for the reasons they claim, by the explanations they have. Okay? To describe it as a claimed ability, even as the belief in the phenomenon itself is chalked up to paranormal religious contexts, as he wrote, or as she wrote, is not without its editorial significance here. You, the author, are obviously trying too hard to sound like you don't for a minute believe in this stuff to really happen. The trick here, which would deflect the accusation of not being neutral, brothers and sisters, in most people's eyes, is his appeal and his declaration that there is no scientific evidence of levitation occurring. Now, on the face of it, having been brought up on the currently prevailing tradition of scientism in Western societies, you would be tempted to think, like this author seems to think here, that this is reason enough to believe that no such event has ever occurred or can occur. But you would be committing a logical fallacy to think in that manner. Absence of evidence is obviously not evidence of absence. Okay, so the best that any naturalist is warranted to say here is that they have never managed to observe an act of genuine levitation in any context where it was submitted to systematic observation and empirical testing. Yes, okay, that would be of course true. Okay, in the greatest probability. Okay, it would. I'm not certain that it is in fact true, but it's probable. It's probable that this is the case. But just because you've never seen a rat, a guinea pig, or a Tibetan monk, for instance, levitate in your lab doesn't mean it has never actually occurred. It has never actually happened in reality. As such, the only reason a naturalist would have to dismiss this claimed phenomenon as nothing but trickery, illusion, or hallucination is their own faith, which is really every bit as religious as in other religions. Okay? And they have to admit that. All I'm trying to do here is have them admit that it is a religious faith that they're relying to. Okay? The author here was careful not to go too far with the declaration of his own faith, so he wrote, alleged cases of levitation can usually be explained by natural causes such as trickery, illusion, and hallucination. Okay? Can usually. Okay, look at this. He said can usually. Okay. But have you ever come across a single case where it could not be explained as such? Has this ever been the case? I mean, rationally speaking, no, you haven't. It's never happened. There's not a single reported case where you or people who share your naturalistic faith would not insist they can, in principle, be explained by natural causes. You may find it difficult in some cases to explain it by trickery, forgery, illusion, or hallucination, but you would never accept even the slightest suggestions of a cause that is not, by necessity, natural. It wouldn't be deemed a scientific explanation, in which case it would only be a religious claim, only a religious claim. Okay, that's how you think, and that's how you were trained to think. And religious claims are religious claims. Okay, religion, not science, and therefore not knowledge. Okay, not justifiable knowledge. Just beliefs that would supposedly fail to be substantiated or proven in any plausible manner. Okay, After all, evidence is the province of science, according to the way that you guys have been brought up. So if this author were indeed honest, they would write, can only be explained by natural causes, okay? Because that's what they really believe. To say that they can usually be explained as X or Y is deliberately misleading. Alright? Any event, E, can in principle be explained by an unseen cause, U, just as it can be explained by a cause that is known through direct sensory experience, S, and by can I mean rational possibility here. So if by natural we mean something that comes from the intrinsic nature of matter as we know it, and if indeed it is the case that there is no rational necessity for a cause to be natural in this meaning, then U can be natural as well as otherwise, supernatural or paranormal or whatever. And unless we acquire direct sensory experience that would turn U into S, then both the natural U and the supernatural U could equally be true explanations for E, in a manner that cannot be determined by observation. In a manner, again, that cannot be determined by observation, by any observation we can afford. Suppose by E we mean a particular case of levitation, for example, and you can't determine through direct observation that its cause is of the S kind, as in being able to detect a hidden cord or a stick or something that's holding that guy who's showing us that he levitates, then it's either a natural U or a supernatural U. Okay, it's hidden, it's unseen, in which case the proper thing to say would be that E can be explained by unseen natural causes such as trickery, illusion, hallucination that we are unable to detect directly, just as well it can be explained by unseen supernatural causes. So it's neither here or there, it's neither here nor there to say that it can usually be explained by natural causes. Usually, according to whom? What you, the naturalist, really believe is that it can always be explained by natural causes, because your metaphysics does not allow for anything but natural causes. Okay? Experience must be telling us, and induction must be propelling us to explain it by natural cause in each and every single case. Okay? Experience cannot lead us to in any other direction, ever, according to your metaphysical premises in the matter. Alright? We Muslims believe that those natures of matter that are the subject of physical law and physical theory are not themselves without unseen causes that brought them about originally and that have been keeping them in place since then. The only reason anybody would have to dismiss that kind of fundamental causes, or transcendental causes, whatever you wish to call them, underlying the laws of nature as we know them, is the unwarranted doctrine of metaphysical naturalism. Okay, and that is a religion, brothers and sisters, every bit a religion as the faith that we hold, that we Muslims embrace. Okay, the belief that it is part of the very definition of the term cause to be natural, or of the natural variety, is religious. We don't have that belief, obviously, we Muslims. It's an irrational belief that can easily be shown to be false by simply arguing that it is rationally possible for all those natures and natural laws and characteristics of matter and regularities that we know by experience from the world around us to have been vastly different from the way that they really are. Okay? So the very fact that they are this way rather than any other way implies contingency. Okay, at a fundamental level, which in turn necessitates a superior cause that determines them to be this way rather than any otherwise. Okay, a cause that is not in itself natural or contingent. Alright, a contingent cause is not necessarily natural in the sense that it must be such that we humans have had experience with it or with something like it in the kinds of matter that we observe around us. It might be systematic or regular, like natural law, in essence, regular, but it needs not be analogous to any cause we have grown familiar with throughout the ages. There's no rational law that dictates this, obviously. Any event, no matter how normal or trivial it is in our daily lives, in our experience, can have any number of unseen causes, natural, as previously defined, or otherwise. Just because we don't have a habit of observing them directly, these unseen causes, as we do some of the causes we call natural, doesn't mean they're not there, much less that they can't be. Okay, this, brothers and sisters, is precisely what the doctrine of metaphysical naturalism commits its greatest fallacy, in what has become or has come to be known as methodological naturalism. An explanation is only worthwhile epistemically if it's scientific, and it's only scientific if it proposes natural causes, okay, all the way through. Every single cause that it might have must be natural, whether we can observe it or not. And the more readily we can provide a natural cause and explanation of all cases of the kind E, the more we can be confident that there is no supernatural cause involved whatsoever in unseen ontology. That's sheer ignorance, brothers and sisters. Reductionism in the extreme. It's not the philosopher or the theorist actually revealing the truth about what's out there in a plausible theory of reality. It's effectively flattening the face of reality in a way that forces it to fit into whatever petty analogy the theorist can come up with in their ontology. It might be perfectly neat, it might be mathematically appealing, quite simple, elegant, relatively speaking, internally coherent and self-consistent in many ways, universal and all-encompassing in its scope, yet none of those properties would make it true. Okay, the mathematics of it might indeed match or simulate a big chunk of the way natures of things appear to work in our limited experience with the reality, and yet its ontology and the underlying analogy it adopts about all of reality might be fundamentally flawed, and it is indeed fundamentally flawed if it seeks or it claims to encompass all of reality by definition. Yes, the methods of Muslim scholars may employ the methods that Muslim scholars may employ in the exorcism of a possessed individual are not scientific in the sense that methodological naturalism would impose, but that does not make them false or epistemically unwarrantable at any rational capacity, brothers and sisters. As pointed out earlier, we do in fact employ systematic observation and empirical deduction in those practices, in a manner that is far more justifiable than the way a natural psychiatrist would approach the exact same phenomenon. Okay, we would employ actual knowledge of the unseen that they have chosen in arbitrary choice of presupposed metaphysical belief to reject categorically, just to employ pure conjecture and unfounded guesswork in its place. There should be no confusion if you understand this theses as presented above, which of the two doctrines is superior and more worthy of producing knowledge and true belief, brothers and sisters. All you need to know is the validity and authenticity of the Islamic scripture involved to achieve this epistemic privilege in a subject matter that is as utterly undeterminable by observation alone as this one that we're discussing here. No physicist has the right to dismiss any religious explanation of the unseen causes that underlie any event in human experience as long as it does not contradict with our inductive knowledge of the natures of things. Your theories about unseen reality will always remain just that, theories, okay, hypotheses, suggestions, statements of assumption and conjecture that are just as likely to be false as they are to be true, with no determining evidence from observation alone. No determining evidence, no evidence that can settle which theory is more worthy of accepting. Okay, and as long as the subject matter of it is all of reality, it's fundamentally false from the word go. Okay, if you're actually claiming this to be the way that all reality is working, or that all reality is like. All right. The mere ability to interpret observations in a manner that fits with such a theory does not determine it to be true in any reasonable sense. Just because you like to think that a man you've seen levitating is fooling you or is tricking your eyes in a way you are yet to learn how to understand doesn't make it so. It doesn't make it so. Doesn't make it false, doesn't make it unreasonable, doesn't in fact justify you in believing that he is indeed fooling you, that he's not levitating in some real metaphysical manner. Reality is a much bigger deal than what you think you know from experience. Only a philosopher trained in the Greek tradition would have the audacity to insist that if it doesn't fit his petty theory, whatever it was, then it cannot be real. Dawkins then proceeds to say, other charlatans exploit people who are grieving by claiming to be able to make contact with the dead, When this happens, it is no longer just fun or entertainment, but preying on people's gullibility and distress. To be fair, it may be that not all of these people are charlatans. Some of them may sincerely believe they are talking to the dead. Oh, how fair indeed. And how decidedly deluded and misguided such people are, by necessity. Unless it is established through science that we can indeed talk to the dead, then it cannot be learned from any other source of knowledge whatsoever that this can be done. Now, I'm not saying that we can, in fact, talk to the dead in this particular manner that those people he's referring to here claim to be doing. There is no such thing as summoning the dead or contacting them through a specially sensitive person to the realm of the dead, someone who's sensitive to the realm of the dead, or stuff like that. No. The way I know this to be the case, though, is not the fact that science has not yet shown this to be possible. That's not knowing it to be untrue, according to science. It's merely not knowing it to be true through those means and methods in particular. Okay, anyone who only accepts scientific evidence should take that stance if he's honest. Okay, it's obviously not the same thing. The scientific method cannot dismiss such a claim in the categorical sense that atheists like Dawkins would insist that it does. It doesn't. This is not how true science works. Good science tells us through proper induction from the input of human experience that X can happen. Okay, we've seen it happen repeatedly. That X is likely or unlikely to happen. We've seen it happen more often than not, under certain familiar conditions from experience, that is, or that C is a plausible cause or explanation in experience for X, because we have seen the causal connection repeatedly. Okay, it cannot, however, tell us that a claimed unobservable cause U cannot be among the causes for X. Okay, it cannot say that. It cannot tell us that. If you break free from the clutches of metaphysical naturalism, you would have no reason whatsoever to believe that dead people cannot be contacted in any way whatsoever, in any way, shape, or form. Just because we are not aware of any physical law by which this can be achieved doesn't make it impossible, brothers and sisters. The magnitude of ignorance that this Greek metaphysical tradition has forced onto its adherents is by all means staggering to anyone who has managed to take a clear-minded look at the overall image from above, okay, from beyond that metaphysical system. I'm not the one inviting people to neglect justifiable knowledge, science, in favor of ignorance and superstition here. No, I'm only inviting people to break free from a belief system that is incredibly reductionist and unbelievably devastating to human knowledge. The naturalism, the metaphysical, the belief of the doctrine of metaphysical naturalism. It's telling people, it's like telling someone to be satisfied with theorizing that all houses everywhere in the world must have people who look exactly like himself and like other members of his own household, the theorist I mean, and who behave in exactly the same way rather than accepting the news from someone who's really been out there, okay, visiting those other houses, who tells him that the world outside is enormously different from what he thinks it is, what he thinks it's like. Philosophy in this matter is what teaches people to be satisfied with ignorance, okay, absolute ignorance, not religion. Okay, we call it jahl murakkab, okay, and a complex ignorance, an ignorance in which you believe to know everything when in fact you know absolutely nothing. Okay, he adds, the third meaning of magic is the one I mean in my title, poetic magic. We are moved to tears by a beautiful piece of music and we describe the performance as magical. We gaze up at the stars on a dark night with no moon and no city lights, and breathless we enjoy, with joy, we say the sight is pure magic. We might use the same word to describe a gorgeous sunset or an alpine landscape or a rainbow against a dark sky. In this sense, magical simply means deeply moving, exhilarating, something that gives us goosebumps, something that makes us feel more fully alive. What I hope to show you in this book is that reality, the facts of the real world, as understood through the methods of science, is magical in this third sense, the poetic sense, the good to be alive sense. Okay. And in doing so, Dawkins aspires to provide the flock of his church with the spiritual dimension in which atheism and naturalism are enormously lackluster. When people who believe this world to have a much grander reality underlying it, that comes from the maker of all things, they feel humbled by the vastness of his power, his grace, his providence, and his authority over all things, whenever they observe such things as he mentioned. It is magical because we are deeply reminded by what it is all about. This is what would move a normal, healthy human being to tears and make them indeed a better person in an existential sense when they can contemplate the grandeur of the creation everywhere around them. A naturalist or an atheist, however, is necessarily standing on barren lands in this respect. They believe that all of reality is nothing but an infinite, pointless, meaningless, endless extension to these stars they observe above their heads. Much more of the very same. In such a metaphysical system, there is no teleological justification for such grandeur or such beauty, such charm that we observe. There is no reason why one came to be alive at all to begin with. Okay, there's no meaning for life, whatever. Why would someone who knows that their existence is so unimaginably pointless in the grand scheme of things, who thinks this beautiful sunset is nothing but a petty rotation among millions to come of a speck of dust among hundreds of billions of similar specks, insignificant as a speck, why would they feel any awe or pure magic in the way dead atoms just happened by pure chance to be behaving as such in this insignificant corner of fundamentally random and incredibly pointless world? The basic tenets of metaphysical naturalism are strong enough to devastate such a sensation before it ever comes to emerge in a man's heart, before it comes to fruition. People are hardwired by nature to aspire to the great beyond, to wish to one day be able to see what is there beyond this tiny cage to which our current existence is confined. They know by pure instinct and innate reason that death is what it is all about. Okay, we all know deep inside that we have to die for the very same purpose for which we were born at all in this world, because we were not created just to suffer this earthly existence, get thrilled by it one day and devastated the next, for as long as the journey would last, with all its ups and downs, only to end up perishing like nothing but dust, like nothing has ever happened at all. Okay, like we were never born at all. Naturalism tarnishes this innate knowledge, rendering it as nothing but myth and superstition, leaving death the single greatest truth of human existence after the very fact of its being real, of this existence being real, fundamentally meaningless. This is not a choice of belief that relieves a person, as an atheist would claim. It's not a belief that would leave you unconcerned and unbothered by the burden of preparing for an afterlife that does not exist. It's rather a choice of belief that would have you spend the rest of your life trying to rationalize a devastating cognitive dissonance that unseats the very meaning of both life and death themselves in your mind, leaving you spiritually hungry for something you can never attain, you can never have. This is why someone like Dawkins thinks that Darwin has finally given atheists reason to be intellectually fulfilled, as he states repeatedly. Because until Darwin, atheists had to battle with the question, if indeed the world is without a graceful and infinitely powerful creator, then why is life so stunningly beautiful, so lush with unfathomable variety, in a manner that leaves a sensible person humbled and forced to glorify something or someone for the way things are like in the world? Why so beautiful? Why so awe-inspiring? Okay, only someone who believes in a grand creator who is deliberately showcasing his vast powers and his grandeur with every little detail in this marvelous creation can be intellectually fulfilled, thinking about it all. Even a little child would feel the urge to exhibit immense gratitude for that maker as the only praiseworthy entity worthy of ultimate grace for all of it. Okay, for all that is observed. This is how humans are built to feel and to think in the natural way of things, in the natural order of things. Darwin, however, was the first to finally offer atheists a proclaimed scientific explanation for all that incredible grandeur of life that fits perfectly within with their metaphysical doctrine of sheer randomness and pointlessness of all of existence. By doing that, he did not really give them actual intellectual fulfillment, as Dawkins would claim, He rather gave them the largest and single most elaborate rationalization ruse for cognitive dissonance that human history has ever known. Okay, this is precisely why the theory became mainstream science in no time, brothers and sisters, and the reason why today it is the foundation of all biological sciences in the Western Academy. Speak all you want of a maker who has wisdom and purpose, who has grace and power demonstrable in every bird, every fly, every tiny molecular motor in a living cell under the microscope. Darwin has finally given them a way out of it all. One that is not, as tradition would have it, a philosophical theory, but rather a foundational paradigm of empirical science. Foundational. Okay? And pay careful attention to this. Anyone who attempts to refute it in its entirety would thus readily be charged with unimaginable ignorance. Viewed as merely a theory of metaphysical philosophy, Darwin's theory would not have had that much intellectual power in a post-Baconian age where science is viewed as true, justifiable belief about reality, whereas philosophy is just another word for futile deliberation and unproductive contemplation about the world. A huge part of the fulfillment that Dawkins gets from Darwin's theory, as he claims, comes from its mere academic status as science, its mere academic label. If William Whewell never coined that historically defining term, scientist, in the 19th century, it is likely that someone else would. Okay, and if it never happened at all, then the label natural philosopher would have had every bit of epistemic authority that the term scientist today enjoys. It's not because the label itself, it's not about the label itself, brothers and sisters, but about the Greek authority it is supposed to inherit. The authority of a theory about all of reality and all of existence that leaves everyone in religious need to construct their entire worldview on top of it, not despite of it. Okay? Call it philosophy, call it science, call it whatever you wish to call it, just grant it this fundamental foundational authority, and you would be praised as a rational, knowledgeable individual worthy of all academic praise. Alright? Once you've done that, you are free to fool yourself then into enjoying that stunning beauty that Dawkins speaks of here, with the bleak background notion that it's all about nothing at all. Okay? It's not there for any transcendent meaning or purpose of any kind, shape or form. So just feel happy and lucky that you were born at all and that you have this tiny span of life to enjoy whatever you can enjoy of it, for as long as it lasts for you, you petty animal. Be the ape that you are told you are and have fun. That's it. Obviously, this is not fulfilling at all compared to a system of belief that offers humans the only sensible, dignified justification for both life and death, and for their clearly favored place in the grand scheme of life in an eternal fate after death that is to be determined by the works and deeds they do in a brief lifespan in this limited sphere of existence. An existence that is obviously built for work and effort by its very first principles, not for pure pleasure. Okay, for a test of mortality, not for eternality. Nothing a naturalist offers can fill that magnanimous space of infinite expanse in the human psyche. And yet, an atheist would have the audacity to claim that he needs no such knowledge of a definitive existential purpose, overarching purpose, to be able to enjoy the beauty of nature in the exact same manner that a believer in that great beyond can. This is what Dawkins' book here is all about, a pathetic attempt to fill an unfillable gap in the heart of every atheist. Wallahu musta'an, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah.
قناة إقناع فيما نرجو
سحابة خير أمطرت على أرض درداء
تحمل من كل زوجين اثنين
المؤمن والملحد
الضال والمهتدي
الموقن والشاذ
فأنبتت بما تحمله من ماء الحياة حيث نصوص الوحيين
ثمار اليقين في قلوب المؤمنين
وصقلت بذات الماء قلوب المعاندين